Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this side event. It's titled Human Rights at Risk Due to Climate Change Triggers. This event is co-hosted by the Climate Action Network South Asia, by SDS, CPRD, and YPSA. And we have some great speakers here for you today to discuss the very crucial link between human rights and climate-induced losses and damage. As we all know, most of us here know, loss and damage was, it was made the headline issue of 2022. It was a 30-plus-year-old fight, and it was the determination of civil society, small island states, developing countries, and eventually also the G77 and China bloc to really center the demand for a loss and damage fund, which escalated through all of 2022. And then at COP27, the demand was kind of forced through with the might of the entire G77 and China bloc behind it. So the COP27 final decision acknowledged that there will be funding arrangements as well as a fund to address loss and damage due to climate change. So that was definitely a huge win for the developing world, for civil society. But that's, unfortunately, it's the beginning of what will be a necessary but possibly quite a lengthy process. So this is a multilateral process, and negotiations are underway first through the Transitional Committee for the Loss and Damage Fund, along with many other parallel discussions, all of which will lead to the operationalization of this fund. Definitely as civil society here, we believe that this multilateral process is sacred, and all of the inputs that are being provided to the process are absolutely necessary. But what's happening in parallel is that extreme weather events are continuing to intensify, continuing to become more frequent, and lives are continuing to be lost. So the human rights perspective is just becoming more and more crucial, urgent. So the purpose of this conversation today is to really kind of push that urgency. Some of the practitioners that we have on the panel today will talk about some very specific evidence-based case studies which really need to be brought to the attention of policymakers, negotiators, ministers, to show that we need this loss and damage fund to be operationalized now. Because while we're having these discussions at climate forums, the number of lives lost, livelihoods lost, the quantum of culture that is being lost is continuing to escalate in parallel. So with that, I think I'll introduce some of us. So good afternoon, I'm Avantika Goswami. I'll be the moderator for today's session. I'm the program manager for climate change at the Center for Science and Environment, a New Delhi-based think tank and advocacy organization. We have with us today Sir Mirza Shaukat Ali. He's from he's the director for climate change and international convention at the Department of Environment for the Government of Bangladesh. We have Mr. Mohammad Shahjahan from Youth Power in Local Action. And we have Nakul from Climate Action Network South Asia. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you for being here today. With that, we'll start off with our first speaker. So, Mr. Shahjahan, I invite you to present some of the grassroots perspectives that you and your organization have gathered through your work and your research. He's going to be talking about climate-forced displacement. And as we all know, climate-induced migration is becoming a new global crisis. So I welcome Mr. Shahjahan to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Avantika. Welcome you all to my presentation. As Avantika mentioned, my topics is on the climate forced migration and what is the relation between the climate change, climate forced migration and the human rights. And as you seen in my slide that which climate for displacement, it needs right-based solution to this problem. So before going to show the link human rights and the climate change or climate displacement, I want to share some scenario of the climate displacement across the world. You all know that according to the UNHCR, the climate crisis is a human crisis, and it is driving displacement. And life is harder of those who already forced to flee. And YPSA also recognizes that climate change is one of the several multidimensional factors contributing to the forced displacement. And recent World Bank study estimated that climate displaced people could be the 216 million across the world, and where by 2050, and where 40 million from the Southeast Asia. And according to the IDMC report, in 2020, 4.4 million people displaced in Bangladesh, which is the 15% of the total displacement in 2020. And recent flood, that means the 2022 floods in Bangladesh, particularly in the north Indian parts of Bangladesh, which displaced 480,000 people in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh currently each year, approximately total 3,000 hectares per year land is eroding, which is displacing approximately 25,000 people annually. So this is the short scenario of the climate displacement. Now I want to make linkage about the climate change and human rights. As you all know that in first ever time in 2009, Office of High Commission of the Human Rights released one report, which they have been able to make relationship between the climate change and human rights. And particular to the climate displacement, the Office of the Human Rights report state that the following human rights, there are some human rights which may be affected by the climate change. And these rights are the right to life, right to adequate food, right to water, right to health, right to housing, adequate housing, and right to self-determination. And recently, Office of the Human Rights Commission, they developed 10 key messages on the human rights and climate change, such as the failure to take affirmative measures to prevent human rights harm caused by the climate change breaches the obligation. So, and more on it, climate change and human rights. In the Paris Agreement, in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, we can see that it states to respect to the promote human rights. Also in the 2022 IPCC Working Group 2, suggested that climate justice comprises justice that links development and human rights to achieve a right-based solution to addressing climate change. And in 2022 July, UN Assembly adopted resolution which recognizes access to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human rights. So these all are the actually present scenario of the climate change and human rights, and different parties and organization and authority are trying to realize this fact and dealing this issue in the human rights perspective. So here, this diagram, I want to show how human rights is violated, suffered by the displaced people. When any sudden and slow onset event happen, people are displaced. So because the failure of the protection. When the failure to be protected, displacement is happening. And after displacement, what is the normal scenario in Bangladesh? A portion of the people migrate to the urban city. Those have some linkage. And in that area, they further face the human rights violation, affected by the human rights because of the failure to provide decent job, break the cultural rights, and some portion of the people, they remain behind in the point of origin because they don't have link to the urban city or no kinship with the urban population, and they remain behind in the point of origin, and particularly they live in the roadside, embankment side, government cuts land. And their rights is very much vulnerable in that area because they don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have different type of crisis, and the health condition also, because they are living in the very temporary settings. So for all these scenarios, there is a need of urgent rights-based solution to this climate sport displacement. So I just want to share one of our case study, because what we are doing as a civil society organization in the grassroots level. This is our approach, how we deal this climate displaced people in the right-based approach. We design our program in three parts. One, the supply side, another in the demand side, and finally, as an example, the planned relocation. So in the demand side, we are actually building the capacity of the climate for displaced people, as well as the community people and the youth community, so that they can together raise their voice to claim their rights, as well as to provide them the alternative livelihood support, so that they can remain, they can live better life in their location. And in the supply side, we are doing the necessary advocacy with the relevant government authority and the different duty bearers, so that climate displaced people can avail their rights. And also they can raise their voice to avail their right. And finally, we are doing some model work in the planned relocation, we call it. And this is the community-based planned relocation for families relocation at a time. So I will give some snapshots of our program, just to show some photographs. And in the demand side, as I mentioned, what we are doing, we are making the awareness raising activities to courtier session, and we are forming the youth forum from the community base and building their capacity. And then, after building their capacity, they mobilize themselves to claim their right from the relevant duty bearers. And after that, we are also doing some alternative livelihood support. As I mentioned, that they are mostly living, those are the remain in the point of origin, they are living in the temporary settings. So to live better, so we are providing them the alternative livelihood support, because of the displacement, they had to force their previous occupation. So alternative livelihood is very much essential for them. So we are giving the capacity development support for the alternative livelihoods. After that, we are giving their input support, logistic support for the stitching training. After the stitching training, we are providing the stitching machine to them so that they can earn money from this. And another livelihood option is to goat rearing. Goat rearing is the very much potential in the coastal people. So we are, after giving the training, we are giving them directly to the goat, so then they can live better, earning more money through this intervention. And beside this, we are also giving some sorts of, because this is the disaster-prone area, so, and their housing condition is very poor, as they are live in the temporary setting. So we are also providing some input support, that is the housing material support to them. There is some photograph on this. Here is some photograph of the water and sanitation support we are also providing, and some sorts of support we are also making linkage with the different government and local government authorities as well. And to do the successful advocacy, with the support of displacement solution, we have some ground banking report and publications, including the climate displacement in Bangladesh, the need for urgent housing, lands, and property rights. This is published in 2012. And after that, we have published another different books, but one of the significant publication is the rights of climate displaced person, where we have mentioned the role of all relevant stakeholders in this pocket book. And in the supply side, we are doing advocacy in the local level, because we know that there is a different type of safety net program of the Bangladesh government, and they have the different type of program of the landless people and all the displaced people. So we are doing advocacy with the relevant government authorities, so that people, they come forward with the relevant packages and provide them to the displaced people. Here is some photographs with this event. This is the one-to-one advocacy with the government. And supply side, this is the very good side to see that after providing the capacity development support to the community people, As I mentioned earlier, the displaced people, youth community, and the community people, they are actually organizing themselves. And they are, you can see that they are organizing human chain. They are giving the memorandum copy to the local duty bearers. They are giving the memorandum copy to the local member of parliament. So that means their voices are raised and they are claiming their rights from the relevant authority. And we also incorporated our advocacy campaign, including the capacity building of the media person. And there was a series of orientation and the capacity building support to the media people. As a result, they have published different media news on this vulnerability of the people, which is used as a advocacy tools. And finally, you know that the Bangladesh government is one of the pioneers in the world who actually relocated many landless and river-rooted people in the different part of the country, but our approach is a little different because for the sustainability, we have seen that when large population of people relocated in the one side, they sometimes face the different types of stigmatization. And host community don't want to make bondage with them because they are also always treated as outsider. So for the region, actually, from the grassroots learnings, we are relocating 1-2 family at a time within this community and this is the very much sustainable model we have seen since 2016. So through this intervention, what we have learned? There is a big learning from us. We have seen that the community people are the very much potential to assess their own problems and they have the solution also. Engaging local communities is essential for the sustainable development. Creating a scope for the alternative livelihood for the displaced people can protect mass migration to the urban cities because people are regularly migrating to the urban people. If we want to remain them in the village level, they should have some alternative livelihood and through this way they can remain in the village. And community comprising of the displaced people is the key to selecting the vulnerable household for relocation and sustainable development. In our approach, all decisions we take through the community team. We form the community team, and by discussion with them, they take decision who will relocate first, who should be provided the capacity building first, because our resource is very limited. And community plan relocation is one of the durable solution of the climate for displacement. And climate for displaced people should be treated from the human rights perspective. This is the lesson learning, and there is some recommendation from the side event to the international community. Climate for displacement and migration issues should be treated as separate agenda item under UNFCCC. There should have a legal framework at the international level under UNFCCC to deal climate-forced displacement from a human rights perspective. State government should also establish rights-based legal framework to deal the forced displacement as part of their willingness. The process of addressing the fund should be simple so that vulnerable countries can access to them. You all know that the Green Climate Fund is a very complicated process. So developing country always hurdle to access this fund. So in the coming period, we think that there will be the loss and damage fund. So this fund should be very simple so that development country can access to this. And we want a delivery plan of the commitment of the doubling adaptation finance and fulfillment of the delivery of the gap of the previously committed annually USD 100 billion by 2020. And finally, considering the reality of the cross-border migration, there should have a universal framework for facilitating migration and resettlement under UNFCCC. So these are the recommendations from my part, and I will stop here, and later on, if there is a scope, I will talk more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shahjahan. I think those were some very potent examples from your community-based work, and particularly you've really demonstrated how that can link to these very macro-level discussions that are had at the UNFCCC level. So I think now, on that note of how specific communities face economic as well as non-economic losses due to climate change and climate-related disasters, I'll now invite Nakul Sharma from CANSA South Asia to share some evidence from a case study in India, in the Sundarbans, on economic and non-economic losses arising due to climate-induced disasters. So Nakul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Avantika. Kudos to our first speaker, Shahjahan sir, for sharing such credible insights about the very basis of why this urgency is there, why there is a need to address the issue of loss and damage funding, when we all know that in principle there is already an agreement which was which happened in COP27 last year. So as Avantika said, I'll just run you through some of the slides, which are mostly pictorial slides, and I'll just make you realize, okay, what is happening in some parts of the global south. And just a second, I'll just take a minute to figure out the technical part of this presentation. Is it visible now? Oh, I think I have to. Yeah. Okay, perfect. I think we all can see it now. Perfect. I think what you all can see is that first slide is all about, as Avantika said, that this is about a case study from Sundarban. You can see from the left-hand top corner that this is a transboundary social, biological and geographical hotspot which is shared by two countries, India and Bangladesh. This is a very large area being fed by multiple rivers. Prominently, the most important rivers are the Ganges, and I think Testa is also flowing through these rivers. A landscape of overall the Sundarbans is around 1900 square kilometers. This is the largest mangrove in the world, which is more than 10,000 square kilometers, shared by again two countries, India and Bangladesh, and also one of the most and world-renowned wetlands that we know as far. Coming on to the whole issue of loss and damage and why urgency is required. As you can see the pictures, I'll not waste any more time to, Shahjahan Bhai has already built up all the background, or the context why there is a urgency which is required. But I think this picture very well shows this is an area which is right at the front of Bay of Bengal. So if you find it on Google Maps, Bay of Bengal is known for notorious cyclones. Around the years, we used to see around 10 or 12 cyclones on an average every year. And you can see from the pictures how cyclones and the rising frequency of cyclones along with sea level rise has broken down or damaged the embankments around the coastal areas of Sundarbans. Loss of livelihood. You can again see from this pictorial presentation. I mean, when you go in these areas, this is a freshwater delta area where rivers comes in and merges with sea. Most of the agriculture practices that you see on ground is like the picture that you can see on the right hand side, whereas a woman is seen, harvesting her daily agriculture produce deep in the water. It's basically rice and other water-based produce, and jute also, which is predominantly been found in those areas. And the left-hand side of the pictures, you can see the impact of climate change. The top picture very well depicts what is happening on ground in terms of salinity, in-ground salinity, because seawater is ingressing and that salinity is impacting the overall fertilization rate or the soil fertility in that area. The lower picture, of course, tells you a much grimmer picture where a woman can be seen holding her child and going through a completely drought-ridden area. Permanent damage to local ecosystem and biodiversity. Again, these pictures are very, speaks for themselves. Very evident that how The sea ingress is cutting land from the coastal areas. It's reducing the overall land availability for the communities in those areas. Both the pictures very well depict not only land, but the local biodiversity. Mangroves, which used to be a natural cover for preventing the local communities and local land from cyclones, from any other natural disasters, we are all losing them fast. Loss of shelter, you can see again in this picture, a full built house, the right hand side of this house, the bunding, the sea is just at the forefront of this house. The bunding has taken up one side of the wall of this house. So it's going to be damaged in next couple of years. Shahjahan again has taken us through the issue of human rights and what it leads to, the approaches to respond to this urgency. What are the response mechanisms which people use locally? Climate-induced migration is one of the most predominant ways through which local communities respond to all of these challenges. Just for a case of Sundarbans, some figures for better understanding. It's an area where around 7.7 million people used to live, 5 million in India, around 2.7 million in Bangladesh. The story is same on both sides of countries of India and Bangladesh. It's the response mechanism is migration to cities, where around 60% of total workforce has lost their original sources of livelihood, which is agri-based livelihood in the last 2 decades, which is fisheries, which is rice harvesting, so on and so forth. There's also a study which was done a couple of years back by Climate Action Network South Asia, which said that around 1.5 million people, this is a minimum benchmark, has already moved out in the last 2 decades from these areas. And most of these, workforce migration are the male population, which moves out in search of bread and butter. Last but not the least, I think what we are doing locally in terms of recommendations is that there is a necessity, and this has also been covered in the presentation by the initial speaker, Shahjahan sir, that we need to do audits of embankments and assess the actual quantitative value of loss and damage. Not only in Sundarbans, this is a case study which has been used to depict the actual loss in Sundarbans, but also in areas where such, prevalent losses are happening. We all see in our media coverage, there was excessive loss and damage issues that were covered around the floods in Pakistan. This is a case study from Bangladesh. We have seen the frequency of cyclone and disaster hitting both flanks of the South Asian region, both in Bay of Bengal and in Arabian Sea as well. The disaster frequency, cyclone frequency. In fact, while I'm speaking, there is a major cyclone which is expected in Arabian Sea also, which was not known to be notorious for cyclone. It was a deep sea. But now we are seeing the frequency of cyclone increasing even in Arabian Sea. So the assessment, the quantitative assessment of loss and damage, both economic and non-economic. Economic relates to the loss of house, loss of shelter, and non-economic impacts leads to the loss of culture, the way of living. All of these things needs to be assessed in a systematic manner, and a figure needs to be around in Global South. We need to arrest, and this is one of the most important, while we assess that important and urgent priorities, we need to assess and arrest the migration rate which is happening, and we need to promote nature-based development in such a way that whatever economic development has to happen locally, it happens in sync with the local needs and in sync with the local geography. Last but not the least, I think the message is loud and clear. The urgency of international climate finance, we all know that COP27 agreed to the necessity of a loss and damage finance facility. But what we are seeing in Substars right now is that there is a discussion of not filling that fund, but also to understanding, okay, what could be the funding arrangements. We all know what funding arrangements are. There is a larger dialogue which is happening around the role of private sector in arranging these funds. I need to state this from the UN platform that private sector, wherever private sector will come, there will be a need to this will not be a grant based or sort of a reparations based financial assistance. This will be investments that private sector will be looking in. So at least for loss and damage, we need to understand that the role of private sector cannot be accepted in Global South, and we need to convey this issue loud and clear that the role for public sector finance should be made mandatory while filling up the kitty of loss and damage finance facility. So having said that, I'll just stop here for the moment and I'll hand it over to the moderator.
Thanks a lot, Nakul. So I think thanks for sharing a very evidence-based approach to highlight what are some very crucial demands. So accurately assessing the extent of losses and damages. Currently, there are certain measures put in place like your post-disaster needs assessment and individual country-specific methods that are developed, but we do need a common multilateral accurate assessment of losses and damages occurring. Definitely a very limited role for the private sector in something that's of the nature of loss and damage that doesn't provide a return on investment. So great points. Thank you so much for that. We've now heard perspectives from the grassroots level. We've heard from civil society. It'll be very valuable for us to also hear from the official perspective from a country government, particularly for a country that is very well versed in coping with extreme weather events, but is also facing the brunt of climate impacts to a great extent. So I'll welcome Mr. Mirza Shaukat Ali from the Department of Environment at the Government of Bangladesh to share his perspectives on loss and damage and shed some light on some of the national level interventions that have been undertaken in his country. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Abantika. Thank you, the two speakers and distinguished guests. I'll just try to share some of the activities that we are doing at the national level. I must mention that I don't work on the disaster management. That's a different department. So I will share the perspective of climate change activities that we are doing at the country. So let me just share some of the challenges that the coastal areas in Bangladesh we face. You know, our coastal areas is huge. It's like 700 kilometer long stretch, and 40 million people live in this coastal area, and it's a very low-lying area. About more than 10 million people live in 1.5 meter, from the sea level. That has become make this area very vulnerable. We have very much water scarcity in some of the southwestern part of the country, and if you go in the lean period, especially in winter seasons, you will become really surprised how the water scarcity affects the life and livelihood of these local people. And we have also salinity problem, and for that reason, the salinity increases up to 25 parts per PPT level, and our saline resilient crops that can sustain up to 10 PPTs. So that has also contributed to the migration of the local people. And you already heard from the other speakers, the cyclone and tidal surge as the major challenges. So as Abantika has mentioned, let me share what on loss and damage we are doing. At the national level, we are not doing much on loss and damage, but we feel the urgency that as funding arrangement for loss and damage is being discussed at the national, at the international level, at the UNFCCC. So we feel the urgency for developing a national framework for loss and damage, and where we can assess the damages that will be that actually occurs after the disaster. So our secretary Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change here, and we are discussing that immediately after our return, we have a climate change trust fund. From the fund, we will access resources, and then we shall develop a framework and then try to address this challenge at the national level. Let me now share some of the activities that actually is hopefully that will be beneficial for the coastal communities, which may actually provide some support or reduce the internal displacement. On 7th June, I have become a project director of a adaptation fund project, which amounts $10 million US, and we are expecting to develop 900 climate resilient housing in the coastal regions of Bangladesh, and that will be our piloting activities, basically, I would say. And ultimately, if it becomes successful, we are interested to go for even bigger projects from Green Climate Fund. And we have another project. This is a small project. This is NDC Action Project. With the help of UNEP, we are developing one mitigation project and also one adaptation project. So under the adaptation project, we are developing 2 climate resilient housing. With wider stakeholder consultation, we have developed these 2 housing, and we're going to construct this housing in two regions. One is southwestern part and one southeastern part of the country. We are also expecting to replicate this project with the support of UNEP and other organizations in a large way if it also becomes successful. We have actually also worked with CTC and Climate Technology Center Network, and with the technical assistance, we have developed a climate resilient housing design with KICT, Korean Institute for Civil Engineering and Technology, but those housing are a little bit more expensive, so we have to customize this further to construct this housing in the local areas. As I mentioned that I work on climate change, so I also want to mention that we have prepared our National Action Plan. We have submitted this National Action Plan to the UNFCCC, and hopefully in the near future we are going to implement some of the projects which will also address the vulnerabilities in coastal regions. And 52% of the investment that we have identified in the NAP is related to coastal region, water and water sector. So hopefully that will also help reduce the rate of migration. And last not least, I want to mention that with the help of UNDP and Comprehensive Disaster Management Program, we have developed a national strategy for internal displacement, which is also very beneficial for the government to control or at least foresee what are the ways the migration is being held and how that can be addressed at the national level. So with these, I want to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaukat Ali. So those are thank you for sharing some very proactive best practices being initiated, planned, conceptualized by the government of Bangladesh. So I think it's evident through the experiences shared by the speakers today that there is action happening on the ground. Ultimately, communities know best how they can advance preparedness plans, recovery plans, when they are being impacted by climate impacts. And there's definite action and great proposals on the ground taking place. But ultimately, for these to be able to scale up, for these solutions to be replicated and prepare communities as well as help them recover from the oncoming climate impacts, more funding is going to be required. So for this, the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund is going to be crucial to help many of these solutions scale up even further. The frequency and intensity of extreme weather events is not going down anytime soon. So data from the organization that I'm a part of, that's CSE New Delhi, has shown that India experienced an extreme weather event for 314 days out of 365 days in 2022, which equates to almost a disaster a day. So extreme weather events of various types are becoming more frequent, more intense, as global warming is also becoming more severe. So it's really crucial that we prevent further human rights impacts as a result of not addressing the loss and damage funding requirements that are escalating. So I'm going to hand over to Nakul from CANSA South Asia to provide some closing comments. So Nakul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Avantika. I think it's very useful, sort of the direction of conversation that we were having, and in fact the insights which were shared by the representative from Government of Bangladesh, Sir Shafqat Ali ji. It's so heartwarming to listen that Bangladesh in itself is preparing so much internally in terms of National Action Plan. They are thinking to provide around 50% of that funding to develop the coastal areas in a holistic manner, to understand how climate resilient housing can be made one of the key priorities, and then also to link it with other verticals of climate change migration, how that migration can be stopped, and local level, community level solutions linked with livelihood, with ecosystem restorations can all be linked in the national adaptation plans. Having said that, I think in terms of closing remarks, what I also need to highlight, as Avantika said, is about while we are presenting a problem, that there is an urgency to address the need of loss and damage, especially at local and grassroots level in Global South. There's also a need to talk about and highlight the need for identifying localized solutions. For an example, Avantika, you said that there is a role for community. In fact, no one can, underline, the local solutions, especially the areas and case studies that we are presenting are areas where there have been which are harsh areas, so to say, and climate change has sort of enhanced the harshness of those communities or those areas for local communities to live in. So historically, communities have already had their practices to cope up with these harsh conditions. Of course, climate change is making these conditions more difficult to address. But for an example, the area of Sundarbans also had witnessed some droughts in the last many decades. The local knowledge how addressing those droughts had not been documented in the disaster relief or disaster response departments in those particular states or areas. There is a need to revive that understanding. There is a need to invest and to cull out the important technical aspects of how droughts were managed historically, how water stress related issues were managed historically, and then whatever the need for international loss and damage finance is there, that gap needs to be bridged through international financing mechanisms. But domestic and local community based solutions are very important. There is a role for gender and child inclusive lens to be applied while making all of these plans. This is very essential because we all know women specifically are impacted more by climate change when it compared to men. Climate change is not gender neutral. Even in my sort of presentation, if men are migrating, they still have options to migrate to other places and earn their bread and butter. What about independence of women? So I think they have one who have the least option to migrate and earn their bread and butter. That perspective must not be missed. That perspective must be built in our understanding, in our planning, and in our future plans. Role for communities, role for gender, and I think with that, I'll say that this is what we have for now, and I'll sum up for the moment.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. And have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Avantika.
Before we finally wrap up, any questions for any of the panelists? Yes?
Thank you very much for all your interventions. You mentioned as one of your recommendations
I think they want you to use the mic so that our online viewers can also hear. Yeah, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for all your interventions. I'm Teresa Mikeush from the Center for International Sustainable Development Law. You mentioned as one of your recommendations the status of climate change displaced people as a legal framework. And I'm wondering how you envision that legal framework and what would be the advantages, if I dare say, compared to refugee status as it is known today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very relevant questions. I think very good questions. As you already, our Mr. Shaukat sir already mentioned that in the country level, Bangladesh is ready to face this situation. And for this reason, Bangladesh relevant policy framework is changing and modifying. And recently, Bangladesh government in 2021 to deal properly with the climate displaced people, there is a strategy. And already an action plan is also developed under this strategy. But in the international level, there is no framework, particularly for the cross-border migration. This is very important because you can hear that the people are telling that the climate refugee, but there is no validity of the climate refugee. You cannot tell this because there is if we see the definition of the climate refugee, there is no climate change or disaster issues. So you cannot tell this as a refugee. So if you want to get your rights in the cross-border migration, so there should have some particular framework or mechanism or convention. So for the reason actually we raise these issues. Thank you very much.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay. Great. So once again, thank you all for coming, and thanks to the panelists.
Thank you very much, Avantika. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. When there's this theoretical necklaces of lost in terms, we sometimes get lost in things. But when you hear what it is actually for, it is something like it makes sense. And I hope like these kind of things will be the bridge making. Like I'm from the European Union, Czech Republic, and I'm from Finland working for those. But this is something I would say like the European USA should hear more of that to get the bridge of the things. And I was happy to hear also the gender thing of this one, where most vulnerable within the most vulnerable are. So it's I think the first time in different places also this rise in gender are coming through. So very appreciate. Hopefully you keep it up in the coming sessions also.
You work with this center. Momita, you know the Momita? Momita? Yeah? Momita Rakata.
Yes, oh, that's interesting because I don't know her personally.
She is the lawyer, and once in the and my home district is the same. He worked with me. When he was a student or just initial stage of this practicing. But and then he moved to Dhaka. But we have to contact him. And at that time, I think 6-7 years ago, there was an association of the lawyers to deal the issue of the climate displacement. And Momita was one of the members.
So the world comes that we are, that the University of Cambridge and our center is developing. It's called Democracy in Education, Global Sustainability Addressing